I don't look very academic. I felt compelled to make this video because I've not made it before, and I've realized recently that I have some little tiny amount of knowledge that some people on BookTube might not have, some little amount of experience that somebody on BookTube might not have. Every few months, some tweet will go viral. It'll look like this, or this, or this, and it'll have to do with the sanctity of the physical book. It's always somebody dog-earing pages, ripping up a book for an art project or to make book reading easier on their commute. It's always about somebody physically tampering or hurting or destroying a physical book. There's always an incredible amount of backlash across book Twitter and in the intellectual communities on Twitter. And I'm here to tell you, well, it just doesn't matter. So a little bit about me and my qualifications to be talking about book printing. I grew up in the printing industry. That's neither here nor there. What's really important is that I have a master's in printing. I have a master's of science in graphic communications, which is a big, long term that confuses people, but really gets down to it is printing. I learned how to operate presses. I taught people how to operate presses. And let me tell you, there are a lot of different kinds of printing presses. I learned about pre-press, how you prep your files, how you make plates to create what you're trying to create. I learned about what goes on after. I have a really pretty holistic understanding of the printing industry. I went to conferences, I learned more in an industry setting, and on top of that, I also had internships where I was literally getting real life experience. And in my last internship, I was actually sourcing a very specific type of printing for the end of my internship, which is relevant to this video, and that is book printing. I was sourcing the printing of pretty big run, major publisher books. So I have a pretty good understanding of printing, and I think a perspective that not a lot of people know about, especially hearing it from a young person. So I also want to preface this by saying, as I mentioned earlier, there are so many different types of printing. The printing industry is huge and encapsulates so much, but I'm only talking about book printing today. Before I get into it though, for real, I'm going to preface this video with a couple points. One, I feel like I'm probably not 100% right. No one can be 100% right all of the time. So please, if you have a different perspective, let me know. But also listen to what I have to say. Number two, I think books are an incredibly powerful tool. I think books are an incredibly powerful tool, especially for underserved communities. I say this because there are a lot of people around the world who don't have access to books, especially young girls and women. So of course, I care about books and I care about how they are a powerful tool, especially the physical book, which is something that is incredibly accessible if you can get it to people. Editing Emma here with a quick little point. Basically, the point I'm trying to make here is not that books are not important and physical books are not important. What I'm saying is that the way in which we decide how people should treat their books is very precious and gatekeepy. And in reality, if someone wants to do what they want to do with a book, in terms of, in this video specifically, the way in which books are produced, it really doesn't matter and it's not that big a deal. And that's basically the point I'm trying to make through this entire video, but I wanted to say it early. So please keep watching. All right, let's dive right into it. Let's get into the major points of this video. 1, books are not a magical object inherently. Maybe the stories inside of them are magical. Maybe they move you, they make you feel heard. Maybe they bring you joy, simple as that. Or bring you anger, which brings you joy, simple as that. But a physical book is not a magical object for the most part, unless, something weird's happening. Now, when people think about book printing, they tend to have these two sort of dual perspectives that converge sort of in the middle, but they don't quite go together. People have their practical mind, which is that, yeah, it's probably printed on a big newspaper press. That's kind of, I think, where people think when they think about book printing. They think of like the Newsies, and they'd be sort of right. They tend to be printed on these big, giant offset lithography presses, and they're run very quickly and with a lot of gusto. Yeah, you'd be sort of right. That's sort of like the simplest way of describing it, in my opinion, a newspaper press, although that simplifies it quite a lot. But then people have their emotional mind, which is they think it's also done in sort of this Gutenberg Bible way, this illustrated manuscript done by monks in medieval England. And that's the sort of the emotional mindset people have. Sitting there, gilding every moment of foil and all of these edges, and having their hands on every moment of the creation of a piece of marketing. Because, you know, when it comes down to it, a book cover is marketing. I wrote my research in grad school about how the history of the book cover just has to do with changes in the marketing of books. So people have these sorts of like romanticized ideas of book printing, and then they have like the more accurate. But the emotional romantic sides tends to win out, and that's why we see people get so fired up. In reality, book printing isn't all that special. It is something that people have down to a science, a literal science. There's color science happening with book printing. There is geometry and math and engineering. It's simply manufacturing, but in sort of a way that is a little prettier than like cars. Another argument people tend to have about book printing and why we have to be so precious with the physical books is that it's a sustainability issue. In reality, a lot of paper plants in the US are self-sustaining. Trees are a crop that they regrow and get rid of and regrow and get rid of. No, it's not always a perfect industry, but a lot of publishers tend to source their paper quite ethically and from places where there are ethical practices. But if you even move past that, a lot of book printing is moving to on-demand printing. So the publisher says, hey, this is how many copies that we need, and then the printer will print that many. So the thing is, they're not precious. They're not a precious object in their manufacturing, and they are manufactured. Now, sometimes people will argue that the beautiful books, the books that publishers have spent a lot of money on, are precious because they're pretty, because they're foiled, because they're this, that, or the other. Now, the thing is, a major publisher, they're going to spend more money if they feel like that book is going to do well. A book like The King of Scars, which has a lot of foil on it. But they're also making a calculated risk in their sourcing. A lot of these processes have become cheaper as they become a science, as they become more into the manufacturing process. The manufacturers of these printing presses have started to build these units that go in line. They have put like foil and die cutting and embossing in line within the line of the process, so they're not doing it separately. A lot of printers are still doing it separately, but it's moving more towards those things happening within the actual process, making it quicker and faster and cheaper. Is this like a fun conversation? I'm being ultra serious. All this to say is that, books are not precious. These printers really, they know what they're doing, and what they're doing is manufacturing. And then finally, this is sort of the last point that doesn't have anything to do with printing, but more just a little moment for me. I think sometimes people who call themselves readers, and I call myself a reader, are very precious, not only with their physical books, but with this idea of being a reader. Reading does not make you better. Reading does not make you a better person. It does not make you a kinder person. That one article or science that came out a few years ago about Harry Potter making you better just felt like it was made to make people feel like they were doing this. They're like, oh, we don't have to teach our kids about racism or misogyny or homophobia or ableism because gosh darn it, they read Harry Potter. No, I mean, books are fabulous tools, obviously, to teach you about different perspectives, to maybe teach you empathy a little bit, to say that reading a certain amount of books or reading a certain genre of books makes you smarter or better or more important, because it doesn't. And I'm not calling anyone out directly, I'm just saying that I've seen this in my real life. People having this mentality, especially when I was an English major, of thinking that being an English major and reading lots of books made them better. And I'm sure I perpetuated that before in my life. But I'm saying that that's not true. And I think when it comes down to it, this idea that physical books are this precious, beautiful objects goes back to this idea that as readers, especially in the US, we think that we are better and we are precious, but we are not. Not because of the fact we read books. Anyway, I hope you guys got something from this video. I wanted to make it for a long time. Hope it was sort of informative. It was a little rambly, but yeah. Have a lovely day.